Bring her to me! Hazelordate's at!
The winter wind howled through the stone corridors of Shadowmere Castle, carrying with it whispers of a king who had never known a woman's touch. King Aldrich Blackthorn, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, stood at his chamber window, watching snow blanket the courtyard below. At 32 years of age, he was a legend wrapped in mystery, a warrior who had united 7 warring kingdoms, yet remained untouched by the very thing that drove most men to madness: desire. It wasn't that opportunities hadn't presented themselves. Beautiful noblewomen had thrown themselves at his feet, their fathers offering alliances sweetened with dowries of gold and land. But each time, Aldrich felt nothing. No stirring in his blood, no quickening of his pulse. His advisors whispered that he was cursed, that perhaps the wolf spirit that gave him his alpha power had taken his humanity in exchange. "Your Majesty," came the voice of Sir Roland, his most trusted knight, "the prisoners from the border raid have arrived." Aldrich turned from the window, his silver eyes, the mark of his alpha bloodline, reflecting the firelight. "How many?" 15, sire. Mostly merchants and travelers who were in the wrong place when the Shadowfen bandits attacked the trade route. "Have them brought to the Great Hall. We'll sort through their claims and send them home." Aldrich moved past Roland, his black fur-lined cloak trailing behind him. "I want those bandits found, Roland. They grow bolder each week." The Great Hall buzzed with activity as servants prepared for the evening meal. Guards lined the walls, and the massive fireplace roared with flames that cast dancing shadows across ancient tapestries depicting the Blackthorn victories. Aldrich took his place on the throne, a chair carved from a single piece of dark oak, its arms shaped like wolves mid-howl. The prisoners were led in one by one, each telling their story, each granted mercy and coin for their troubles. Aldrich dispensed justice with the same cold efficiency he applied to everything in his life, until she walked through the door. She was the last prisoner, and everything changed. Aldrich's breath caught in his throat, something that had never happened before. The woman was small, draped in a tattered gray cloak that couldn't hide the defiant set of her shoulders. Her hair, a cascade of copper fire, fell in tangled waves past her shoulders. But it was her eyes that struck him like a physical blow, green as the forests in spring, fierce and unafraid despite the chains around her wrists. For the first time in his life, Aldrich felt heat flood his veins. His wolf stirred within him, a presence that had always been silent regarding matters of the flesh, suddenly howling with recognition and want. His hands gripped the armrests of his throne so tightly the wood groaned. "Name," Roland barked at the woman. She lifted her chin, those emerald eyes finding Aldrich's and holding them with an intensity that made his heart thunder. "Elara Thorn." "Thorn?" Roland exchanged glances with another guard. "Any relation to the Thornwood family?" "I know no family," she said, her voice like honey and smoke. "I travel alone." Aldrich found himself standing, moving down the steps of his dais before he realized what he was doing. The entire hall fell silent. The king never approached prisoners personally. Yet here he was, drawn by an invisible thread he couldn't resist, stopping just feet from her. "Why were you on the border road?" His voice came out rougher than intended. Elara's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him with an intelligence that surprised him. Most people couldn't hold his gaze for more than a few seconds. "I was traveling to Silverwood. I work as a healer." "A healer?" Roland scoffed. "The bandits said she was with them, Your Majesty, that she helped plan the raids." "That's a lie." Elara's chains rattled as she stepped forward, and Aldrich had to physically restrain himself from reaching out to steady her. "They took me prisoner 2 weeks ago. I refused to treat their wounded, so they planned to sell me in the southern slave markets." "Convenient story," Roland muttered. But Aldrich believed her. He didn't know why, but something in those green eyes told him she spoke truth. More than that, the thought of her in danger, of her being hurt or sold like property, filled him with a rage so intense his eyes began to glow, the warning sign that his alpha power was rising. "Release her," he commanded. "Your Majesty," Roland stepped forward, concern etched on his weathered face. "We should question her further. The bandits were quite specific." "The bandits are dead men who will say anything to save their own necks." Aldrich's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I said release her." The guards fumbled with the keys, removing Alara's chains. She rubbed her wrists, never taking her eyes off Aldrich. There was something in her gaze, not gratitude exactly, but a calculating awareness that intrigued him even more. "You're free to go," Aldrich said, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to keep her here, to never let her walk out of his sight. "Roland will provide you with coin and provisions for your journey." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Alara bowed slightly, but there was something almost mocking in the gesture. As she turned to leave, Aldrich felt panic claw at his chest, a foreign emotion he didn't recognize. "Wait," the word escaped before he could stop it. Alara turned back, one eyebrow raised in question. Aldrich's mind raced. He couldn't let her leave, but he also couldn't explain why. He was the Alpha King, feared across 7 kingdoms, who had never wanted anything he couldn't conquer with sword or strategy. Yet here was a woman who made him feel like a boy again, uncertain and desperate. "The roads are dangerous," he heard himself say. "You should remain in the castle tonight. Tomorrow I'll provide you with an armed escort to Silverwood." Something flickered in Alara's eyes, triumph, knowledge. It was gone before he could identify it. "As you wish, Your Majesty." As guards led her away to the guest quarters, Roland moved close to Aldrich. "Sire, this is most unusual. You've never—" "I know what I've never done, Roland." Aldrich turned to his knight, and for the first time in years he felt truly alive. "Have someone watch her, discreetly, and find out everything you can about Alara Thorn." "Of course, Your Majesty." Roland hesitated. "Sire, are you feeling well? Your eyes are still glowing." Aldrich realized his friend was right. The silver glow that marked his alpha power hadn't faded, which only happened when he was in battle or extremely emotional. He took a deep breath, forcing calm. "I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long day." But as he climbed the stairs back to his chambers that night, Aldrich knew he was lying. He wasn't fine. For the first time in his life, he wanted someone with a desperation that terrified him. The Alpha King, who had never touched a woman, who had never felt desire's pull, was falling, and falling fast. He stood at his window again, staring out at the snow, wondering which chamber she'd been given. Wondering if she was looking out her window too, thinking of him. The thought made him laugh, a bitter sound. Why would she think of him? He'd shown her nothing but cold authority. But tomorrow he would see her again, and somehow he would make her stay. What Aldrich didn't know, as he finally lay down to sleep, was that Alara Thorn was indeed standing at her window, but she wasn't thinking gentle thoughts. Her green eyes reflected the moonlight as she whispered to the darkness, "Phase 1 complete. He saw me. He wants me. Now the real game begins." She touched the small vial hidden in her bodice, a vial containing a poison that could kill even an Alpha King. The Thornwood family had sent her to do exactly that. And she'd never failed a mission before. Alara couldn't sleep. She paced her chamber like a caged animal, the stone floor cold beneath her bare feet. Everything had gone according to plan, better than planned, actually. The Alpha King had taken one look at her and crumbled like a sandcastle before the tide. Men were always so predictable. Yet something gnawed at her conscience, an unfamiliar sensation that she quickly tried to suppress. When their eyes had met in the great hall, she'd felt it too, that electric current, that inexplicable pull. It had taken every ounce of her training not to react, not to show that his silver gaze had pierced something deep inside her that she'd thought long dead. "Focus," she whispered to herself. "He's just another mark, another tyrant who deserves what's coming." But was he? The Thornwood resistance had told her stories of King Aldric's cruelty, his iron fist, the way he'd conquered kingdoms and bent them to his will. Yet in the Great Hall, she'd seen something else entirely. The way he'd immediately believed her story, the protective rage in his eyes when he thought she'd been hurt, that wasn't the behavior of a monster. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alara tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the small blade she kept hidden in her boot. "Who is it?" "A servant, my lady. I've brought you some things you might need." Cautiously, Alara opened the door. A young woman stood there, barely more than a girl, holding a bundle of clothes and a tray of food. Her eyes were kind but curious. "His Majesty thought you might need fresh clothing," the girl said, stepping inside. "And you missed dinner, so I brought bread, cheese, and some of Cook's famous rabbit stew." "That's very thoughtful." Alara studied the girl as she set down the items. "What's your name?" "Myra, my lady." The girl curtsied, though Alara noticed her movements were stiff, as if the gesture pained her. "Are you hurt, Myra?" The girl's eyes widened. "How did you—" She stopped, touching her side gingerly. "It's nothing, just a fall down the stairs yesterday." Alara's healer instincts kicked in before she could stop them. "Let me see." "Oh no, my lady, I couldn't." "I'm a healer, it's what I do." Alara guided Myra to sit on the bed, lifting the girl's shirt to reveal a nasty bruise spreading across her ribs. She pressed gently, feeling for breaks. "Does it hurt when you breathe?" "A little," Myra admitted. Alara moved to her pack, one of the few possessions the guards had returned to her. Inside, hidden among her meager belongings, were herbs and tinctures for healing, and one vial that was decidedly not for healing. She carefully selected a jar of arnica salve, keeping her back to Myra so the girl wouldn't see the poison. As she worked the salve into Myra's bruised ribs, the girl started talking. "You know, His Majesty has never done that before." "Done what?" "Taken such interest in a prisoner. The servants are all talking about it." Myra's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say you've bewitched him." Alara laughed, though the sound was hollow. "I'm no witch." "Maybe not, but something's different about you. The king looked at you like—" Myra paused, searching for words. "Like he'd been asleep his whole life and just woke up." The description unsettled Alara more than she wanted to admit. She finished applying the salve and helped Myra back into her shirt. "There. Wrap your ribs with this cloth at night and the bruising should fade in a week." "Thank you, my lady," Myra beamed. "You know King Aldric isn't what people say. He's stern, yes, but he's fair. When my father was accused of stealing from the royal stores, it was the king who investigated personally and discovered my father was innocent. He even compensated us for the false accusation." Alara forced a smile. "That's good to hear." After Myra left, Alara sat on the bed, her head in her hands. Every piece of information contradicted what the Thornwood resistance had told her. They'd said Aldric was a tyrant who ruled through fear. Yet here was a servant who spoke of his fairness, who showed no signs of terror or resentment. What if she'd been lied to? The thought was poison itself, worse than anything in her vial. The Thornwood family had taken her in when she was 12, orphaned and alone. They'd trained her, fed her, given her purpose. Lord Thornwood himself had held her hand and told her that King Aldric had murdered his entire family, that the Alpha King was a monster who needed to be stopped before he destroyed everything. But what if it was all a lie? Alara pulled out the vial, holding it up to the candlelight. The liquid inside shimmered like liquid moonlight, beautiful and deadly. Wolfsbane mixed with nightshade and a dozen other ingredients, specifically designed to kill an alpha. One drop in his wine and King Aldric would be dead within the hour. She should do it tomorrow, get close to him, earn his trust and strike. That was the plan. So why did the thought make her feel sick? Meanwhile, in his chambers, Aldric was having a crisis of his own. "You're packing," Roland observed from his chair by the fire. "You never pace." I'm not packing, I'm thinking. While walking back and forth repeatedly, most people call that packing. Roland took a sip of wine. Sire, talk to me. What's going on? In all the years I've served you, I've never seen you like this. Aldrich stopped at the window, the same window he'd stood at 1,000 times before. But tonight, the castle felt different. She was here, somewhere in these walls, and he could feel her presence like a beacon in the darkness. I don't know what's wrong with me, he admitted quietly. When I saw her, Roland, it was like the world suddenly had color. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, actually, Roland smiled. I felt the same way when I met my Catherine. She walked into the tavern and I knew, just knew, that my life had changed forever. But you're normal. You've always felt attraction. For me, it's never happened, not once in 32 years. Aldrich turned to face his friend. What if this is the curse finally manifesting? What if she's here to destroy me? Roland stood, crossing to place a hand on Aldrich's shoulder. Or what if the only curse was loneliness and she's here to break it? You're a romantic fool. Perhaps, but I'm a living romantic fool, which is more than I can say for the poor bastards who never take risks. Roland squeezed his shoulder. The report came back on her, by the way. Alara Thorne. She's been traveling the kingdoms for about 5 years, working as a healer. Good reputation helps the poor, doesn't ask for much payment. Before that, he hesitated. What? Nothing. Her history before 5 years ago is blank. It's like she didn't exist. Aldrich's wolf stirred uneasily. That's suspicious. Or she's running from something. Many people reinvent themselves, sire. It doesn't make them criminals. No, Aldrich agreed, but it makes them complicated. After Roland left, Aldrich tried to sleep but failed. His mind kept returning to those green eyes, to the way she'd stood before him without fear. Most people trembled in his presence. His alpha power ensured that it radiated from him like heat from a forge, making others instinctively submissive. But not her. She'd looked at him like an equal, like she could see past the crown and the power to the man beneath. He wanted to know her, needed to know her, every secret, every scar, every smile. The realization terrified him. Just before dawn, Aldrich made a decision. He would court her properly like the noblewomen in the old songs. He would show her that despite his fearsome reputation, he could be gentle, patient, worthy of her. He had no idea that in the chamber below, Alara was making her own decision, to give herself one more day. One day to observe him, to confirm whether he truly was the monster she'd been sent to kill. One day to figure out why her heart raced when she thought of his silver eyes. One day before she committed murder or committed treason against the only family she'd ever known. As the sun rose over Shadowmere Castle, both the hunter and the hunted prepared for a dance that would change both their fates forever. Neither knew that Lord Thornwood's men were already at the castle gates, disguised as merchants, ready to ensure that if Alara failed in her mission, they would finish it themselves. The game had begun, and the stakes were life, death, and something far more dangerous, love. Morning light streamed through the stained-glass windows of Shadowmere Castle, painting the stone floors in jeweled colors. Alara stood before the mirror in her chamber, barely recognizing herself in the emerald gown that Myra had brought at dawn. It was finer than anything she'd ever worn, velvet and silk that hugged her body before flowing to the floor like water. His Majesty requests your presence at breakfast, Myra had said with a knowing smile, in his private dining chamber. Now, as a guard escorted her through the winding corridors, Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. The vial of poison rested against her skin, hidden in a small pocket she'd sewn into the bodice of the dress. One opportunity, that's all she needed. But her hands trembled, and she hated herself for it. The guard opened an ornate wooden door, and Alara stepped into a room that stole her breath. It wasn't the opulent throne room she'd expected. Instead, she found herself in a circular chamber with windows on all sides. offering views of snow-covered mountains and forests. A simple table was set for two, laden with bread, fruit, cheese, and steaming tea. And there, standing with his back to her, looking out at the mountains, was King Aldrich. He'd shed his formal attire for something simpler, a black tunic and leather pants, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he turned at the sound of her entrance, Alara saw vulnerability in those silver eyes that made her chest tighten. "You came," he said softly, as if he'd genuinely worried she wouldn't. "You commanded it, Your Majesty." "Aldrich, please," he gestured to the table. "And it was a request, not a command. You're not a prisoner here, Alara. You're free to leave whenever you wish." The words were a knife to her gut. Free to leave. When had anyone ever told her that? The Thornwoods certainly never had. She moved to the table, hyper-aware of his presence as he held out her chair. His fingers briefly brushed her shoulder as she sat, and the contact sent electricity racing through her veins. She saw him react too, a sharp intake of breath, a momentary closing of his eyes as if steadying himself. "I need to apologize," Aldrich said, taking his seat across from her. "Yesterday, I let my authority speak when I should have let my humanity. You'd been through an ordeal, and I treated you like a political problem to solve rather than a person who needed compassion." Alara blinked in surprise. In all her training, all the scenarios the Thornwoods had prepared her for, none included the Alpha King apologizing to her. "You freed me," she said carefully. "That's more than most kings would do. Freedom is the bare minimum of decency. You deserved more." He poured tea for her, the domestic gesture oddly intimate. "Tell me about yourself, Alara Thorn. Where do you come from? What made you become a healer?" This was the moment. She could spin her cover story, draw him in deeper, and poison his tea within the hour. Instead, she found herself saying, "I don't remember my parents. They died when I was young. A fever swept through our village. I survived, but I was alone." It was the truth for once, the first truth she'd told in years. Aldrich's expression softened with genuine empathy. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrifying for a child." "It was, until," she hesitated. This was where the lies usually began, where she spoke of kind strangers who taught her healing arts, of traveling from town to town helping people. But looking into Aldrich's eyes, seeing nothing but honest interest and compassion, the lies stuck in her throat. "Until someone found you," he prompted gently. "Until I learned that survival requires hard choices," she said instead, which was also true. "I learned healing because I never wanted to feel helpless again. If I could save others, maybe I could save myself." Aldrich nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you know. When I came into my alpha power at 16, everyone expected me to be a warrior, a conqueror. And I am. But every battle I won, every kingdom I united, I did it to prevent the wars that killed my mother. To create a realm where children wouldn't starve because their lords were too busy fighting to plant crops." Alara stared at him. I mean the stories say you conquered for power." "Stories often miss the truth." A sad smile played at his lips. "It's easier to paint me as a monster than to acknowledge that sometimes peace requires strength. That sometimes the only way to stop endless war is to be strong enough that no one dares start one. But you've killed people, executed those who opposed you." "I have," he agreed, and she respected that he didn't try to soften it. "Traitors who would have plunged kingdoms back into civil war, bandits who preyed on innocents. Yes, I've executed people, and I carry the weight of every life I've taken." He met her eyes. "Do you think me a monster for it?" The question hung between them, loaded with more meaning than he knew. This was her chance to confirm what the Thornwoods had told her, to see the tyrant they'd described. But all she saw was a man burdened by duty, haunted by the choices he'd had to make. A man who could have ignored her in that throne room, but instead had seen her as a person worth saving. "I think," she said slowly, "that the world is rarely as simple as monsters and heroes. Something shifted in Aldrich's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. He reached across the table, and before she could think better of it, his hand covered hers. The contact was electrifying, sending warmth flooding through her entire body. "I've never felt this before," he whispered. "This connection. Everyone thinks I'm cursed, that I'm incapable of feeling what normal men feel. But the moment you walked into my throne room, everything changed. I felt everything." Alara's throat tightened. She should pull away, should maintain her distance. But her hand turned under his, their fingers intertwining as if they'd done this 1,000 times before. "Aldrich, I—" The door burst open. Roland rushed in, his face grave. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. A group of merchants arrived this morning seeking an audience. They claim to have information about the Thornwood resistance." Alara's blood turned to ice. She pulled her hand from Aldrich's, but not before she saw his expression. Confusion at her sudden withdrawal, at the flash of panic she couldn't quite hide. "The Thornwood resistance," Aldrich stood, immediately shifting into his king persona. "I thought they were dealt with years ago." "Apparently not, sire. These merchants say the Thornwoods are planning something, an assassination." Aldrich's eyes flashed silver. "Of whom?" "You, your Majesty." The silence that followed was deafening. Alara felt the room spinning. They'd sent backup. Lord Thornwood didn't trust her to complete the mission. So he'd sent others, men who wouldn't hesitate, who wouldn't question. Men who would kill everyone in this castle if necessary. "Bring them to the throne room," Aldrich commanded. "Assemble the guard. And Roland," he glanced at Alara, something protective flashing in his eyes, "double the guard on the guest wing. If there are assassins in my castle, I want everyone protected." After Roland left, Aldrich turned back to Alara. "I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted this morning to go." "It's fine," she managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "You have duties." He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek with such tenderness that tears pricked her eyes. "This isn't duty. You're not duty. Whatever is happening between us, I need you to know it matters to me. You matter to me." Then he kissed her. It was gentle, questioning, asking permission even as he gave it. And Alara, who had been trained to manipulate and deceive, who had killed before in service to the Thornwood cause, felt herself break apart and remake in that single moment. Because this was real. Whatever else was a lie, this feeling, this overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful feeling was real. When Aldrich pulled back, his eyes were glowing silver, his alpha power responding to his emotions. "I know this is fast. I know it's insane. But I need you, Alara. Not as a king needs a subject or a man needs a woman. I need you like I need air. Like I need my heart to beat." Aldrich, she couldn't finish, couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. "Stay with me today," he said. "After I deal with this threat, stay with me. Let me show you who I really am." He left before she could respond, his guards falling into formation around him. Alara stood alone in the beautiful chamber, her hand pressed to her lips where his kiss still burned. Then she ran. Not to flee the castle, though part of her screamed to do exactly that. She ran to find the merchants before Aldrich did, because she knew exactly who they were. Marcus Thornwood, Lord Thornwood's eldest son, and his men. They'd come to ensure the mission succeeded. And if they discovered that she'd failed, that she'd fallen for the target, they would kill her too. She found them in the courtyard, being escorted by guards. Marcus's eyes locked on hers, and she saw the question there. She gave the subtlest shake of her head. "Mission not complete." Marcus's expression hardened. He would act today, she realized with growing horror. He wouldn't wait for her careful approach. He'd strike during the audience, consequences be damned. Alara thought of Aldrich's kiss, of Myra's kindness, of Roland's loyalty. Thought of a king who'd shown her more humanity in one day than the Thornwoods had in 5 years. And she made her choice. As the group entered the castle, Alara slipped away to the armory. If Marcus was going to strike, she needed to be ready, not to help him complete the assassination, but to stop it, even if it meant destroying the only family she'd ever known, even if it meant becoming the very thing she'd been trained to kill, a traitor. Because sometimes, survival required hard choices. And she chose Aldrich. The real question was, would he still choose her when he learned the truth? In the throne room, Aldrich waited, unaware that the woman he'd just kissed held his life in her hands, unaware that in the next hour, everything would change, unaware that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with betrayal and end with redemption, if they're lucky enough to end at all. The throne room doors opened, and Marcus Thornwood walked in, his hand already reaching for the poisoned blade hidden in his coat. And somewhere in the shadows, Alara ran faster, praying she wouldn't be too late to save the only man she'd ever loved.